are reaches of the northern world, where the sea claws endlessly at jagged coasts and mountains loom over narrow fjords. The people of Scandinavia were forged by hardship. The winters were long and merciless, draping the land in snow for months at a time, while summers, though short, were a frenzy of life fishing, farming, and preparing for the cold's inevitable return. The soil gave little, the fields were small, and survival depended not just on strength of arm but also cunning of mind. The people lived in longhouses built of timber, roofed with turf, where families and livestock often shared the same smoky air. Inside, stories were told, tales of gods and giants, of Odin's wisdom and Thor's thunder, of Loki's cunning tricks and the doom of Ragnarok. Children were raised on these stories, and they grew knowing life was short, uncertain, and often cruel. It was not enough to endure, it was essential to seek honor, for honor outlasted death. To die in obscurity was to vanish, to die in glory was to be sung about for generations. It was from this crucible of harsh land and harsher expectation that the Vikings emerged, people restless, daring, and destined to shape the world beyond their icy shores. If the land made the Vikings tough, the sea made them powerful. Their greatest invention, the longship, was more than a vessel, it was a weapon, a symbol, and a lifeline. Long, narrow, and light, with shallow keels that allowed them to sail up rivers as easily as across oceans, the longship was unmatched. Its planks overlapped like fish scales, giving it both strength and flexibility. Carved dragon heads often adorned the prow, meant to ward off evil spirits and strike terror into the hearts of enemies. With their sails of red and white wool billowing like the wings of some great beast, Viking fleets seemed alive, swift, and unstoppable. At sea, they rode with the rhythm of drums, oars slicing water in perfect unison. On land, they could haul their ships over rough ground, carrying them between rivers and around obstacles. No fortress was too far inland, no coast too hidden. Their weapons were simple yet devastating. The axe, cheap and efficient, was favored by many. The sword, more costly, was a symbol of wealth and status. Shields of round wood, painted with snarling beasts, were not just protection but also tools for formation, locking together to create a wall of iron and oak. And always, their belief in destiny made them fierce. To the Viking warrior, death was not to be feared. To fall bravely in battle meant entry into Valhalla, Odin's hall, where endless feasts and battles awaited. With such faith, they hurled themselves into combat with a fearlessness that broke the will of their enemies. It was in the year 793 CE that Europe first trembled before the Norse. The island monastery of Lindisfarne, off the northeast coast of England, was a place of peace, its monks devoted to prayer, copying holy texts, and living humbly beneath the protection of Christ. But on a summer's day, the horizon darkened with shapes. Longships appeared, their sails catching the wind, their oars flashing like silver. The monks had no weapons, no walls, no army. They watched in horror as warriors leapt ashore, their hair wild, their axes raised, their voices lifted in terrifying war cries. The monastery fell swiftly. Chalices of gold and silver were seized, manuscripts torn, and the monks slaughtered or dragged into slavery. Smoke rose from the cloisters as the Norse returned to their ships, their holds heavy with plunder. News of the attack spread swiftly. Chroniclers wrote of dragons seen in the skies, of omens of fire and blood. Never before, one monk wrote, has such terror been seen in Britain. But Lindisfarne was only the beginning. The Norse struck Ireland, raiding monasteries at Clonmacnoise and Kells. They swept down the coasts of France, even daring to raid as far south as Spain. Europe soon learned that the Vikings were not a passing storm. They were a tide, relentless and rising. Yet the Vikings were not only raiders, behind the fury of battle lay the rhythm of daily life. On farms carved out of forests or clinging to rocky hillsides, families worked tirelessly to produce enough to survive. Barley, rye, and oats were staples, while livestock, cattle, sheep, and pigs, provided meat, milk, and hides. Fishing, too, was a constant, with nets cast into fjords and harpoons used on whales and seals. Viking women ran households with authority. They spun wool, wove cloth, managed farms, and raised children. In a world where men might vanish for months or years on raids or voyages, women kept communities alive. Laws even gave them the right to divorce, own property, and manage estates, rights uncommon in much of medieval Europe. Trade was another lifeblood. Norse merchants traveled east into Russia and south to Constantinople, bringing back silver, silk, and spices. They exchanged furs, amber, and walrus ivory for treasures of the wider world. Slaves, taken in raids, were a grim but profitable trade, carried to markets from Ireland to Baghdad. Viking settlements, too, flourished. Dublin was founded as a Norse town. In England, they carved out the Danelaw, a region where their laws and customs ruled. In France, Norse settlers became so rooted that they were granted Normandy, the land of the Northmen. The Vikings were not just destroyers, they were builders, founders of cities, and weavers of connections across continents. At the heart of Viking life was belief in their gods and myths. Odin, the All-Father, was a one-eyed wanderer who traded an eye for wisdom at the Well of Mimir. He was a god of war and poetry, of sacrifice and secrets. Thor, red-bearded and mighty, wielded Mjolnir, his hammer, striking down giants and protecting mankind. Loki, sly and unpredictable, sowed mischief and betrayal, yet his cunning often saved the gods as much as it doomed them. Their world was Yggdrasil, the world tree, whose branches reached the heavens and whose roots drank from the realms of gods, men, and the dead. At its base coiled Nhggr, a dragon gnawing eternally, while above, an eagle spread its wings against the sky. And always in the background loomed Ragnarok, the end of days. In that final battle, Odin would fall to the wolf Fenrir, Thor would slay the serpent Jormungandr but perish from its poison, and the world itself would burn and sink into the sea. Yet from the ashes, a new world would rise, green and fair. These myths were not mere stories. They gave meaning to life, courage in battle, and comfort in hardship. They were sung in longhouses, carved into runestones, and whispered in the roar of thunder. Among the Vikings rose figures whose deeds blurred the line between history and saga. Ragnar Lothbrok, feared raider of England and France, was said to have worn armor made of woven wool, charmed against blades. His exploits grew into legend. He sailed with his sons to conquer kingdoms, only to meet his end in a pit of serpents, laughing as he declared, "How the young cubs will avenge their father." His sons Bjorn Ironside, Ivar the Boneless, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye became rulers and conquerors, leading the great heathen army that swept across England in the 9th century. In the west, Eric the Red, exiled from Norway and then Iceland for blood feuds, sailed to discover Greenland. Harsh and icy though it was, he convinced others to settle, founding colonies that endured for centuries. His son, Leif Erikson, ventured farther still, reaching the shores of Vinland believed to be North America around the year 1000. There, the Vikings built short-lived settlements, the first Europeans to set foot on the New World. And in the east, Harald Hardrada, once a commander of the Byzantine Varangian Guard, returned to Norway and claimed its throne. His ambition led him to invade England in 1066, but he fell at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, his death marking the twilight of the Viking Age. Not all Norsemen sought glory in the west. To the east, Swedish Vikings followed the rivers that cut through the vast lands of what is now Russia and Ukraine. Known as the Varangians, they traded, raided, and eventually ruled. From Lake Ladoga to the Dnieper River, they built routes linking the Baltic to the Black Sea. They founded Novgorod and Kiev, laying the foundations of the Rus people whose very name came from Rus, the Norse word for rowers. Some journeyed all the way to Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire. There they served as the Varangian Guard, the emperor's elite warriors. Clad in heavy armor, wielding massive axes, they were feared for both their loyalty and their ferocity. Byzantine records speak of them as incorruptible, bound by oaths, their presence both a shield and a warning. Norse left their mark not only on the west, but on the east, shaping kingdoms and empires far beyond their homeland. By the 11th century, the age of the Vikings was drawing to a close. Europe was no longer fractured and weak. Kings grew stronger, armies larger, and castles more formidable. The surprise raids that once terrified now met organized resistance. Christianity spread throughout Scandinavia, carried by missionaries and kings eager to align with Europe's powers. Pagan sacrifices gave way to church altars, and longhouses gave way to stone cathedrals. The Norse spirit endured, but it transformed. Their descendants became dukes of Normandy, England, rulers of Russia. They married into European nobility, their old gods fading into myth, their sagas written down as stories of a bygone age. The Viking Age ended, but its memory did not. The Vikings were more than raiders. They were explorers who reached the New World, traders who connected to Asia, settlers who built cities, and storytellers whose sagas still echo today. They shaped languages, left their mark on law and custom, and gave rise to dynasties that still influence history. Their story is not only one of fire and blood, but of endurance, exploration, and imagination. And though 1,000 years have passed, one image endures, a long ship on the horizon, its dragon prow cutting through the mist, as warriors stand ready, eyes fixed not on what is, but on what might be.